Welcome to Trail Talk, San Gorgonio chapter's monthly program brought to you by the San Gorgonio chapter of the Sierra Club. My name is John St. Clair and I will be your host. I think I'll put myself on spotlight there. I will be your Zoom host tonight, and there's a couple things I need to go over before we start the actual presentation. First of all, if you have questions during the presentation, please type them in the chat section. At the bottom of your screen, there should be a little talking bubble with the word chat under it. And if you click on that, it opens up a screen where you can type in. The default is to everyone, and you can just leave it there and type in your question, and that way you won't forget it, and we will get to it eventually. And then the other thing is we want everyone to be muted except for the speakers. So if you haven't already done that, please mute yourself, except for the speakers, of course. And those are the main Zoom rules. Now, tonight's topic is troubleshooting your hikes, and next month's topic is nearby nature. So, and following I guess it is July. Let's see, this is April. May, June would be river rafting. So we have nearby nature in May and river rafting 101 in June, where Marianne Reese will present her experiences on Sierra Club National river rafting trips. Should be a great one. So I think that pretty much covers what I needed to cover. And tonight's it is actually going to be a panel discussion, although Julianne Anderson will take the lead on it, and she's the one who put together the PowerPoint presentation that we'll use as our framework. But there will be several of us, myself, Julianne, Joe Amador, Carla Kellums, and Marianne Reese will all be joining in on the panel discussion, giving our insights about troubleshooting hikes. So I think at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Julianne Anderson, and I'll put a spotlight for her. And there we go.
Thanks, John. Good evening, everyone. Nice to see everyone here. Good sized group. Rather than doing a formal introduction, as we usually do, I think each of us panelists will just self-introduce. And we'll do it alphabetically. So Joe Amador, you're first.
Well, hello, thank you, Julianne and John. Just to introduce myself, I hike leader with the Big Bear group in San Gorgonio. I've been doing that for a couple of years now, and trying to hopefully provide some kind of addition to this topic.
Joe's very modest. He is an intrepid traveler and has hiked and walked through Europe. So he's going to be presenting later this year, I think in October, on hiking the Camino.
October.
So we're looking forward to that. Yeah, so that's going to be fun this fall. I'm second, Julianne Anderson. I'm also an outings leader here in the chapter and a member of the Trail Talk committee. So Carla, you want to tell people who you are?
Yes. Hi, everybody. I'm Carla Kellums, and I'm the outings chair for the San Bernardino Mountains group of the San Gorgonio chapter of the Sierra Club. That's a mouthful. And I've been a hike leader guy for probably about 8 years now. And I've got a lot of experience. A lot of my experience comes from being a mother to a young child. So I got a lot of experience with hiking with kids and hiking with dogs.
Fabulous. And John, you want to round us out here?
Okay, so yeah, I'm John St. Clair. I'm the outings chair for the Los Serranos group of the San Gorgonio chapter. And myself and Carla and Julianne form the committee that puts on the Trail Talk series. And I have a lot of hiking experience, both before joining Sierra Club in 2011 and since becoming an outings leader that same year in 2011. So I will be sharing some of my experiences.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, panelists, all of us. Let me share my screen and we'll get started with our slideshow. Hang on just a sec. All right, here we are. Trail Talk, troubleshooting your hikes. And we want to talk about how to anticipate things that aren't always what we expect. So, and they will always happen. So best to be prepared. The first thing we wanted to talk about, kind of the key to troubleshooting in the big picture, is preparation and communication. I just wanted to share a story I had. A couple of years back, I took a kind of a simple hike in Joshua Tree up Ryan Mountain. It was a kind of a novice hike. I invited some of my friends I work in LA at the city attorney's office. So wonderful friends, really, really sharp lawyers, but novice hikers. And I had told them it's going to be, you know, it was in April, it was a spring day and it may be warm, but bring layers. Wear hiking clothing and just be prepared for warm weather. I wasn't explicit in communicating. I had prepared by looking at the weather. I brought extra water, but I didn't tell them what hiking clothes were. My friends showed up in yoga gear because they didn't really have a notion of what appropriate hiking gear is, especially for the desert. And yoga gear was okay, but it's not okay if you hit something spiny. It's not going to protect you much. And they had sneakers on, and they didn't have any water. So I just wanted to emphasize with that little story, prepare, and I want to go to Carla a little bit about, you know, and John and Joe about looking at various weather and other sources in your preparation and mapping your hike. But communication is also really vital. You've got to talk with your people and don't make assumptions about their level of expertise. Carla, do you want to talk about how you prepare sometimes for your hikes in terms of looking at news sources, weather sources, that sort of thing?
Yeah, given that majority of my hikes are up here in the San Bernardino Mountains, weather is definitely a big factor up here. And so I do monitor not just one, but I will go to a couple different weather sites. And you can go online, you can go to NOAA, you can go to, you know, they have weather apps. The one I like up here is called Ben's Weather or Lake Gregory Weather. And I just kind of get an idea for what the short-term and long-term weather looks like. So I try to plan several days in ahead of time because if I do want to reschedule my hike, you know, I'll have some notice to give to the people that I want to go hiking with to reschedule the hike if there is going to be inclement weather. So I definitely recommend weather. And also up here, you want to, you know, especially in the fall, take in considerations, check to make sure there's no fires or other disasters, road closures, stuff like that, that'll inhibit you from getting up on the mountain.
Other things that I found to be helpful, if it's a new hike that I haven't done before, I hike it before the group hike, before I go either with the Sierra Club or my friends. I bring extra food, extra water, a couple of extra layers of clothing for other people in case somebody forgets. I check it out in guidebooks and trail apps. I just think it's good to do the research, and I call and speak with everybody. Whether it's a private hike or a Sierra Club hike, I actually want to talk with every person so that, you know, after that Ryan Mountain experience. I like to talk with every person. John, Joe, any additional ideas about prep or communication?
Well, I like the fact that you put on there that you actually do the hike before. I think if you're going to lead a hike or bring people on it, it's really important sometimes that you go out there and do that hike and know what you're going to be looking at, where you're going to stop for breaks, where you're going to have lunch, what the conditions are. A little bit beforehand, unless you tell them that it's going to be exploratory and you're going to wing it.
Yeah, definitely. Well, we're thinking about 3 general areas to consider before you go on your hike. And we call them the environment, gear, and the human factor. So let's start with the environment. And things to break the environment down into are weather, these days, fire, and wildlife. So let's start with weather. We live in an area where we're hiking sometimes equally throughout the year, desert or mountains. We can be in snow, we can be in extreme heat. There could be storms, especially up out on the mountain. There could be flash floods. There's a lot of weather considerations here in this chapter. A lot of varied weather considerations throughout the year here. Carla, do you want to start us off talking about type hikes and how you prep, how you think about that?
Yeah, so the one element that living here on the mountain at over 7,000 foot elevation, we do get quite a bit of snow. And so I do have a lot of experience. I do lead and take friends out on snowshoe hikes. Like I said before, when you are going out into the elements, especially if you have snow or rain or potential of rain and snow, you always, of course, want to check your weather. If it's going to be very foggy, cloudy, whiteout conditions, torrential downpours, I definitely recommend rescheduling your hike for more favorable weather. But also you want to take in consider with snow, you want to take in consideration, what type of clothing you're going to wear for that element. In snow, I always recommend people have at least 3 layers. The under layer, the mid layer, and then the outer layer, which should be water resistant. And just, plan ahead of time for your gear as far as your snowshoes and your boots and your poles and stuff like that.
Carla, do you have people snow seal their boots? Some people are kind of anti snow seal on leather boots. But in snow, I think dealing with wet feet is difficult, wet, cold.
It is, it is very difficult. I've known people to, who don't have, maybe don't have very good water resistant boots. And I've been in that position before who have, there was one hike where I was concerned that the snow was very wet. So I actually put some plastic bags over my socks to keep my socks from getting wet in my boot. So definitely things. I've been on hikes where I've invited friends snowshoeing, and I've got friends bringing snowshoes that are from like the 1950s. They're the old wooden snowshoes with the wicker or the leather on them, and those snowshoes are just not appropriate given the age and the wear, and they just didn't hold up. Unfortunately, that person had to eventually remove the snowshoes. Luckily, we had enough people on the group to pack down the snow so that they could follow along in the back in just boots. But take in consideration, your gear when you're dealing with snow or rain.
Yeah. And how about conditions where we have kind of sudden onset of rain or sudden onset of snow up in the high country or out in the desert, sudden onset of flash flood type rain? Has anyone experienced that, and how have you dealt with that?
Yeah, so I had a situation where we went hiking just behind my house out in the national forest, and it had rained earlier that day, but the sun had come out. It was beautiful. The sun was shining, so we were thinking, oh, this would be a good time to go out for a hike. What we didn't know is there was little pockets of little squalls headed our way. And as we got out, there was a couple little squalls of rain. What we did was, because they were kind of squalls of rain, we were able to just kind of hang out under a tree until it would pass. And then we decided, just in case there's another one, we better head back. So, always err on the side of caution. And if you're not sure about something, you could always head back, and you can always reschedule for a later date.
Right, right. Now, what about lightning? Standard that I always learned was ground yourself, drop to one knee at least, and stay away from like the single tree out in the middle of the meadow. You want to be the one thing sticking up, and you want to be grounded. Anyone else have any thoughts on lightning when you have an incoming squall or storm and you may be up at altitude on a slope or out in the open?
Well, I usually try and hurry down the hill as fast as possible and get out of there.
Yeah, I just think it's pretty dangerous situation. So just stay away from open areas and protect yourself by grounding and waiting out if it's imminent strikes, but getting the heck out of there is a good strategy. What about extreme cold or extreme heat? Especially if your friends or Sierra Club hikers are inadequately dressed. Have we had a situation where people don't have like a jacket and it gets really cold, or people aren't prepared for the heat with breathable clothing, anything like that? Have we had that happen? I've had situations where people just didn't bring a jacket, and that could be a real in a cold situation, and that can be very disturbing. We ultimately, I think, were able to rustle up enough layers among the group for that person, but people that show up in a t-shirt or like a cotton t-shirt, and I think our friend Chris Torres had the saying, cotton kills, because it gets wet and it doesn't dry, and then you have something wet and cold on your body. So important maybe to stuff a couple of extra layers into your bag, in your day pack, to share if need be, or some kind of poncho or lightweight, the foil blanket at the very least, where someone could wrap up and have something to keep warm in case a sudden drop in temperature. Heat is a special problem with desert hiking. And we'll talk about heat stroke and heat exhaustion, but I've had situations where people, they didn't cover up with, to protect their skin, and they didn't have sunblock and didn't have a good hat. You can really kind of suffer out there. Anybody else have these experiences with hikers on the hikes you've been on?
Yeah, I think having a good hat is important in heat. But the main thing about dealing with heat, and this is even more important at altitude and heat, is to stay hydrated. You got to have plenty of water and use it. You got to stay hydrated.
Yeah, I think we were mentioning, we were talking about people that for one reason or another inconvenience on the trail, they don't drink, they don't want to be, having to step aside and relieve themselves, in the brush. And boy, that's kind of a recipe for disaster if you're not drinking, especially if it's a hot day. And this, yes, I see a hand. I see a hand. You want to unmute?
No.
Just, yes, I'm okay. I'm unmuted. As a biologist, I do know that if you have fabric and you wet it, it will evaporate and it'll wick heat away from the body. So if they're really in heat exhaustion, that's going to cool them down like pretty quick.
That's a great.
So a hat, wet the hat, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's an important thing is, you know, I've had a couple of hikes where people, they're not in heat stroke, but they're certainly in heat exhaustion. And we're going to talk about that with health concerns in a little bit. But yeah, you know, prepping for changes in weather, certainly an important thing. And I agree with Carla, err on the side of caution. Now, we have to, being in California in climate change, we have to talk about fire and fire on our hikes. I think it's important for us to be very aware, especially during the summer, of wildfire, where they are and where the smoke is. Has anyone hiked near smoke? John, have you hiked near smoke or fire?
Yeah, I've never had, well, actually, I did have one encounter with fire in Ice House Canyon in the Cucamonga Wilderness, but it wasn't a large fire. But the worst experience I've had is in the Sierras with smoke, both in Yosemite and also in the southern Sierras. And it makes it just about impossible to hike because you can't breathe.
Yeah.
And you don't have to be close to the fire to get the smoke. The wind conditions determine where the smoke goes, and you know, one day it can be clear and no problem at all, and then the next day it blows all the smoke into the area where you are at, and it's very, very difficult to do anything about that because you don't have any control, and just hope the wind shifts.
Yeah, we talked about, you know, if you are, there's a situation where I was out with some friends on a hike out in the Holcomb Valley area. And as we were hiking, we looked ahead and we saw this big plume of smoke similar to what you see in the picture. And in that situation, like I said, you always want to err on the side of caution. Once you identify that there could be a potential hazard, you go ahead and reverse course and get back to your vehicle as soon as possible. The other thing too is when we've been out hiking, sometimes we go out hiking near areas where there's a campground or dispersed camping. And we've encountered fire pits that were smoldering. So we do take the necessary precaution, pour water on it, cover it up, make sure it's no longer smoldering, because that could be a potential fire risk. And that's something, you know, anybody could mitigate very quickly. Also, if you're in an area where you know that you're not supposed to have fires, sometimes you'll encounter individuals who don't know, and maybe they'll be getting ready to start a fire or have a little fire going. Sometimes it's best to just approach them in a very nice way and just let them know, just so you know, we're in a high wildfire area and they, you know, the Forest Service or whoever is not allowing fires at this time. Most of the time, the people are really nice. They just don't know. They're not from the area. So it's just nice to approach them. If you are unsure, though, you never approach anybody that you're unsure. Err on the side of caution and always report any suspicious behavior to the appropriate authorities.
Right. And John, you had that Ice House Canyon experience where there was a fire that you and the other hikers could not control. It was like a campfire, right?
Yeah, someone apparently had a campfire and they didn't put it out properly and it was smoldering, and we tried to put it out, but we couldn't. So we ended up aborting the hike and going back down, and went to someone's house and asked to use the phone to report the fire so that fire personnel could go up there and do a complete job of putting it out, because a fire left smoldering can be a problem, particularly if the wind picks up.
Right, right. Yeah, I had a similar experience just earlier this year. We were actually just taking a long walk out at Lake Paris. I mean, talk about nearby nature. But you know, the campgrounds, there are campgrounds there, and somebody had left and it was smoldering. They had to call out the fire department because it caught fire on the brush and was going up the hill toward Marina Valley. So yeah, easy to do in dry conditions, super easy. So I think it's really important what you guys are talking about, being watchful, responsible hikers and citizens. Just abort the hike. I mean, a fire could be a real disaster. Think about El Dorado. It was like, what was it? Gender reveal, one little pyrotechnic and then the whole mountain went up. So yeah. I put in the slide things like wind, terrain, time estimates, exit strategies. I just wanted to kind of emphasize how fast fire can move. So don't think you can outrace it. Don't think that it won't shift around and come down a canyon and up to you if you're on the other side from it. I want people to be really well aware that even though it may seem far away, it may not really be in terms of how fast fires move. So get out of there. Okay, wildlife. These are two photos. I think the top one was from Chris Torres, and she saw this, I believe it was out in the desert, and they were doing like a moonlit hike, and she was the hike leader and was sweeping her flashlight, thank goodness, in front of the group, and she saw this rattler right there, ready to strike somebody's ankle. So always be pretty careful when you're hiking in rattlesnake country, the whole chapter, and be very careful.
I have a
Carla,
couple.
you were mentioning. Yes, go ahead, John.
So I have a couple rattlesnake stories, but before I share that, I just want to share what Scott put in the chat. He says you can check air quality, AQI, on your iPhone weather app. So that is something maybe you can check, particularly if there have been fires in the area and you want to check to see what the air quality is like before you leave to go on a hike. Now, yeah. Rattlesnakes. So yeah, Sunday, I saw 2 rattlesnakes on the trail. This is the time of year when they come out. One was only about a foot long. The other was probably about 2.5 feet long. And I dang near hit the thing with my trekking pole. And fortunately, didn't hit it because I'm sure it would have made it quite upset. But they were both, I think they heard us coming. They were off to the side and heading off. We were on a fire road kind of thing. And they were heading to safety. They weren't coiled and ready to strike, but you really have to keep your eyes open, and they really blend in, particularly if they're not moving. It's really hard to see them. You've really got to keep your eyes open, and starting now, it's important to do that. I was on one hike where our leader, Marianne Reese, stepped on a rattlesnake and jumped off of it. And then we had the situation where the group was separated. A lot of times the leader will actually go past a rattlesnake and kind of wake it up or alert it, and then it will start rattling, and you're separated, your group is separated. And you've just got to wait until the rattlesnake leaves the trail. Probably not a good idea to try to move it with your trekking pole. Although I saw someone do that once, but I certainly wouldn't recommend it. You can try stomping on the trail to see if that will encourage it to leave. But if they're if they're riled up, sometimes they can be pretty persistent about not wanting to leave. And if you throw rocks at it, I had one case where we were trying to throw rocks nearby to scare it off. And if anything, it just made it more mad and not wanting to leave at all. So it can be a problem.
Yeah, rattlesnakes are probably one of the most common things you're going to encounter, especially in our area. I definitely, with a rattlesnake, do not recommend throwing anything at it or trying to get it out of the way with a stick. Just do your best to give it a wide berth. So if you can, reroute your hike to go way around it and just completely avoid it. The other thing too is if you like to hike with your dogs, like I do, there's a training you can get them called rattlesnake aversion training. And our dog has gone through it twice, and she has alerted us to 2 different situations where we encountered rattlesnakes. She reacted in a way that we knew there was a rattlesnake there, and sure enough, there was. So I highly recommend the rattlesnake aversion training if you like to hike with your dog.
Same thing with our dog, and it's coming right up. It's on Mother's Day weekend. It's up there in Lake Arrowhead. So look it up. I think we were at the same one, Carla, a couple of years ago. Excellent training, and our dog remembered. It's kind of nice from year to year. He did remember. So just one more story about rattlesnakes. I just wanted to impart. I'm a gardener, and it was around this time of year, I was cleaning off my potting shed and just kind of brushing the leaves off. And I pulled a pot away from the potting sheds against my house. And there between the pot and the stucco was a big red diamond rattlesnake. And I about jumped a mile. And then I looked at it. It looked like it was dead, but it was hibernating. It was still kind of in hibernation. But boy, oh boy, did it wake up fast. And if you think that they're groggy or stiff or sleepy, oh no. And if you think that they take like one big rear back and a huge, a second to strike, it struck about twice in a second. I mean, I called the county animal control, and she came out with the big loop and a pole that's quite a long pole. And this was a long snake. And it's a good thing, because that thing, I was shocked how fast it struck, and its mouth was hinged and it opened huge. So I mean, it's just pretty damn dangerous. I mean, it's a deadly viper. Just think of it that way if you don't already. And don't touch it. Don't go near it. Bad news. The second bad news, and yet a beautiful snake, I will say that. And we ran it up into the hills and left it, and it coiled like a cobra, and it was very angry, but back into its habitat away from my potting bed. So bears. Marianne Reese gave us this photo of a bear near the trail or their campsite. It looks like it's a California black bear. Does anyone have stories about black bears in your campsite other than our typical Sequoia and Yosemite stories, and maybe grizzlies in the north? John, you were up in Glacier and you had to carry bear spray, or you chose to.
Yeah, we really never had to use it, thankfully, but I've had lots of experiences with black bears. And you don't really need to be afraid. You need to be respectful of black bears. But, at all the campfire programs in the campsite, the ranger always says, make yourself look big and make lots of noise, and don't turn your back on the bear. Because if you see the bear and you turn your back and you go to get your camera, turning your back on it and moving away is an act of submission. And then it becomes very difficult to shoo the bear out of your campsite. So face the bear, make lots of noise. At one point, my wife chased a bear all around a campground with a wooden spoon and a pot banging on it. Black bears are not interested in eating us. They're only interested in eating our food. Now, grizzlies, brown bears, that's a different matter.
Yeah, I just, sorry, I wanted to bring up a point too. When you encounter a mama bear and a baby bear, mama bears can get very protective, especially, if you are in bear country, it's best to keep your children close or in between 2 adults. And if you do come upon, we did have a situation up in Sequoia National Monument where we came across a baby bear and a mom. Unfortunately, we scared the baby bear. The baby bear ran up the tree, but the mom was snooping around, trying to help her baby. And we were doing what was called the bear scare, where you make yourself really big, you make lots of noise, you yell at it. And that's something you can go over with your children, before you go on your hike. If you are in bear country, that if we see a bear, don't turn and run. We're going to do the bear scare and then practice it.
Mhm. And Sequoia, I don't know about the monument because I haven't spent time there, but the national park, I've seen more bears there than anywhere else in California. I mean, we've had just car camping there. Moms and cubs, cub in the bathroom, mom outside, boy, oh boy. Not good. And bears every night in the campsite. So just the Chris's pot and spoon is my favorite method. People were starting to fire off guns, which is always scary in camp. But yeah, just be prepared for that because they're definitely around.
I have a tip for camping in a place where bears frequent, and we learned this in Sequoia, and it was taught to us by a camp host. They were having bears break into cars every night, and we had kids, and kids eat in the car and crumbs drop, and you worry about smells that even if you're putting all your food into the bear box, which of course is essential, there still might be smells in your vehicle, particularly if you have kids that are a little messy while eating. So what the camp host did is he had a spray bottle of ammonia, and he sprayed our windows with ammonia. So ever since then, when we've gone camping, we always bring a spray bottle of ammonia, and every night, ammonia is fine on your windshield, doesn't cause any problems. It actually can be used as a cleanser. And that odor will mask any residual odor that might be in your vehicle.
That's a great idea. Wow. That is a terrific idea. Wanted to touch on the other big mammal that we may sometimes see, although they're far less numerous, mountain lions. I live out here in Riverside, but near Corona, but I used to live up by UCR, and there are often mountain lions in the hills behind UCR. I mean, they frequent the Cleveland National Forest also if you're hiking down in Orange County, and of course up in the mountains. I do have one story. It was a friend of mine who's a big man. He's a mountain biker in Utah. He lives in Salt Lake, and he was mountain biking up by Park City. And Charles is like 6'5", but he was mountain biking alone in an area he hadn't been, and he rounded a corner, and oh my goodness, there was a huge mountain lion. And Charles said he had never been more afraid in his life, because this is a mountain that was big enough to take even a 6'5" man out. So he just gunned out of there. Unfortunately, he went past the mountain lion, and he realized he had to come back pass it again to get out of this canyon. But luckily, when he did that, he kind of got his courage up. It was gone. But very frightening. And just know, you may never know. You round a bend and you may see something like that. So I think the bear scare is probably the best thing. The mountain lion scare. Make yourself big. Make noise. Don't let your kids be far away from you. And that's where, especially for those of us that are smaller humans, you hear stories about women who end up with mosquitoes and ticks. What's the best way to get to avoid mosquitoes? And give me your opinion about DEET versus non-DEET versus organic versus DEET and mosquitoes, and time of year to hike and mosquitoes.
I was actually in tick country on a hike today, on the front country near Strawberry Creek, and right now the ticks are starting to come out. This is the time of season. I always recommend, if you have dogs and kids, to use something that doesn't have DEET in it. Use a family-friendly type of spray, bug spray. It may not be as potent. So of course you always want to do a tick check after you complete your hike. Everybody takes the opportunity to look you over, make sure there are no ticks sticking to your clothing or in your hair. And then the other thing too is, when we do know that we've been in tick area, we always come home, we take off all our clothes, throw them in the washer, get them going, and we all take a shower. So, those are definitely some precautions you can take for ticks.
Especially with dogs, we talked about this, Carla. I think both of our dogs are little tick magnets. We were up in Point Reyes in the wetlands and on a pretty wide trail, and he wasn't going out into the brush, but oh my goodness, he had 15 on him, and he's like a beagle-sized dog. They just jump. So you do have to be really careful. And I had, in my ear, that kind of thing. So you really have to be very careful. Mosquitoes. What are your thoughts about hiking in mosquito country and time of year, and how you deal with that? John, do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, I try to avoid mosquitoes at all costs. And like in the Sierras, the time that you go up there makes a big difference. So I go on a mule pack trip every year, and I like to go mid to late August rather than in July, when there's a lot more mosquitoes out. So if you have the ability to pick your time, then that's the best way to just avoid them.
Joe, any thoughts? And what about mosquitoes and insects and whatnot over on the continent, over in Europe?
Well, again, with what John was saying about the high Sierras, what we do sometimes with, especially if you're backpacking and you're going out into the country, there is spray all the clothes with the Promethean, and pre-treat it. So you have a little bit of a barrier there for the mosquitoes. And of course, you always take your net.
Yeah.
You always have one available. And it helps a lot with the mosquitoes. Sometimes it's unavoidable. You're going to hit the mosquitoes.
Yeah. Talk about the net and how you use it.
Well, I have two types. One of them has a little drawstring at the bottom, which it fits over the hat. So it's pretty wide. And it's very effective. It just,
for your head.
you just have to remember to bring it in your pack.
Yeah, good idea.
Also helps with the gnats too.
Right.
When you're hiking in the streams.
Okay. And you get that at REI?
Yes.
Right. Good to know.
You can get them anywhere, really. Big Five, Amazon.
Yeah. Good to know, because that's just, barrier method.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Gear. Hiking, of course, you're not going to have the same amount of gear as backpacking, but you are going to have your 10 essentials and your clothing, your day pack, your boots. 3 things to consider: lack of gear, you've got to have your 10 essentials, and gear failure, even on day hikes. Lack of gear is a problem if people forget things. And that's particularly water and some form of food. Any stories about lack of gear, gear failure? John, I think didn't you have a situation where your platypus leaked one of the? Yeah.
I use water bottles because several times on hikes I've led, people have either had a leak or they didn't realize that they were drinking too much, didn't have enough to last the whole trip, and just starting back on a long hike, suddenly they have no water left. But one thing I also want to mention, the picture there shows a little tiny whistle. And I highly recommend using the storm whistle. And I'm putting into the chat right now the web address. And I just checked it out before getting on. So the storm whistle is the loudest whistle in the world. And so that comes in handy if you get lost or you get hurt and you need help. It travels a long way. I was on a Sierra Club hike in Joshua Tree, and one hiker got separated. I was the sweep, and I was waiting for him. He went behind a bush, but I was also watching the rest of the group because they turned out of a canyon heading to another canyon. And apparently I was looking at where the group was going. It didn't see him walk by me, and he didn't see me, and he ended up going up the canyon. So by the time I realized that he had gone up there, I went to the group, ran to catch up to the group and said, hey, a hiker went up that canyon, and someone had a storm whistle. And this was a person who was a volunteer rescue person for Joshua Tree. And he said, cover your ears. And then he blew the whistle, and oh my gosh, if you didn't have your ears covered, it would have blown your eardrums out. And even though we were in a different canyon, the hiker heard the whistle, realized that he was in the wrong place, turned around, started coming back, and then we backtracked and got him. So right away when I got home, I bought the storm whistle. And like I said, I checked it out, and they have another one now. The storm whistle is huge. They have something called a wind whistle, which is half the size of the storm whistle and almost as loud, but it's easier to carry in a pocket or whatever because it's smaller. So I highly recommend you have a good whistle.
Yeah, that's a great idea, John. That's a terrific idea.
I've had gear failure a couple times. This has happened to me where the strap on my backpack, my day pack that I was wearing, broke. And if I can't, jerry rig it and try to tie it back together, one thing I like to keep handy, and I keep it in my little first aid kit that I carry, is a little roll of duct tape. And there has been situations where I've had to use that little roll of duct tape to keep my backpack together, because it's not fun carrying a backpack just on one shoulder. So that duct tape has saved me a couple times when it comes to gear failure.
Oh yeah, I do want to tell a story, a kind of tribute to my dad. My dad was kind of World War II generation, and he grew up on a farm, so he was very cognizant about things breaking and fixing things. And he was not a minimalist hiker or backpacker. He always had duct tape, a lot of it. So yay, duct tape. And then he always had like heavy thread and heavy needle. Those are the days of canvas. And then extra straps. Several, and extra cordage. So he could fix just about anything that broke, and things did break. And right down to like your boots, when like the soles maybe separate from your boots and you have to wrap duct tape around it, that kind of thing. So good to have a liberal amount of duct tape along with the other stuff. So yay, duct tape.
Yeah, I had an experience on a mule pack trip. The first day hiking up to the base camp, and we were going to spend 5 nights there. My left boot sole split and started peeling off. And fortunately, somebody had quite a bit of tape, because we had to retape it several times to make it through the whole 5-day trip. But we use Gorilla tape, which works just as well as duct tape.
Right, good. Some kind of tape like that. I've had tents that, have gotten ripped, and that keeps the waterproofing going. I mean, it's just really essential. Speaking of essentials, always, of course, every hiker should have the 10 essentials, everyone. And they should know what they are. And when you're talking to them beforehand, kind of like my friends, don't make assumptions if they understand what that is, if they're new to hiking. That needs to be articulated, communicated. Okay, human factor. Let's talk about, this is our third thing, environment, gear, and the human factor. Let's talk a little bit about health emergencies, behavioral challenges, getting lost, finding lost people, and considerations for kids and dogs. Let's talk about health emergencies. First, before we go into our stories, I do think, you know, a good first aid kit is really vital. I mean, every hiker should have one, but if we're hike leaders, we should have a better one, especially blisters, aspirin, material for bleeding. Blisters are always a problem, you know, on hikes, or frequent problem. Dehydration, I found, is a tougher one. And another frequent problem. And I kind of combat that by just taking water breaks. I mean, do you guys do that?
Yeah. And just a word of note, one of the symptoms of dehydration can be muscle cramps. And I had an experience with a hiker who had severe muscle cramps, and it turned out he wasn't drinking his water because he didn't want to stop to pee on the hike. And that's not a good idea. Especially if you're hiking in the summer or at high altitude, you've got to stay hydrated and drink plenty of water.
Well, and nice to, you know, talk with people in prep for the hike. They should be hydrating the night before too. You know, big glasses of water the day before, night before. And don't mean to be, you know, distasteful in any way, but a lot of people don't know that the way you tell if you're hydrated is usually the color of your urine. If your urine is almost clear or just faintly yellow, you're pretty well hydrated. If it is very yellow and God forbid it's brown, boy, you're in trouble. You need to be drinking a lot more water. So that's a real indicator of how your body's doing. It needs to be very dilute. Your urine should be very dilute, and just faintly yellow. And that way you're on the road to hydration. Let's talk a bit about heat exhaustion and, God forbid, heat stroke. Who's had heat exhaustion and who's had hikers with heat exhaustion? Joe, Carla?
I've had, sorry, Joe, I've
No.
had hikers more often than not get what they call altitude sickness, which can be brought on also by dehydration. And if you are planning on hiking at elevation, it's highly recommended that you give your body a chance to acclimate a little bit. So go up to the elevation and hang out for a little bit just to make sure you're feeling okay before you go on your hike that goes up and to elevation. And just staying hydrated if you're at elevation is very important too, to prevent dehydration.
I found aspirin is a kind of a peremptory. Couple of aspirin helps when I'm heading up to elevation. In addition to drinking a whole lot of water. Joe?
Yeah. Aspirin is a vasodilate, so it will dilate the blood vessels and it will get more oxygen to your brain. So some people do like to carry some just in case they need it, but I don't recommend taking it unless you really need it.
Good advice. And Carla, by the way, is a former EMT, so she knows. Okay. In case of heat exhaustion, obviously stop, rest, have the person drink water, cooling cloth, wet cloths are sometimes helpful. Any other suggestions dealing with someone like that?
Oh, the wet hat was suggested earlier.
That is a good one. Is good. Let's talk just for a minute about lack of conditioning. We're getting into hiking season, and John, I know that this year you've been really smart, especially with people coming out of COVID, starting outings again. You've been doing conditioning hikes. How's that been going?
Well, I have one tomorrow. So we'll have a few people hiking with me to try to get altitude conditioning. But the way I approach it in the spring is each week I try to go a little higher, and just slowly build up each week, going a little bit higher than the week before. And and I found as I get older, it takes longer.
Yeah, that's okay. On our hikes, have we had serious strains or sprains or broken bones? And if so, how have we handled that?
Yeah, I've had a couple sprains, like sprained ankles. In those situations, if it's not super severe, we'll have one person on each side of the person to kind of help them distribute the weight, and then kind of walk them out, assisting them. As far as broken bones, I've got other examples of when I worked as an EMT or worked at the ski resorts at Ski Patrol. If you do have a situation when there's a broken bone, if it's not too severe, if it's an inline break, of course you want to do what you can to get the person out. If it is a severe situation, if the bone is poking out, there's lots of severe bleeding, of course you want to control that bleeding first. And that would be your direct pressure. In that situation, since that could be life-threatening, you want to send somebody for help. That would be a situation where you would need to send somebody for help. In situations where you're not able to assist the person out off the trail and back to your vehicles or back to an area where you can call for help, that's when you would send somebody out for help.
Anybody ever had the group carry a hiker out? 8 or 9 hikers carrying another hiker out that's incapacitated. That's kind
No,
of the,
thankfully.
Yeah, no. We've assisted, one person on each side of the hiker to help them assist them out, but not like have to carry them out.
right. That takes kind of a large group. Anyone ever had to deal with a heart attack or a seizure of a hiker? I mean, that's
No.
such a serious thing, but I think you kind of think that through.
Yeah, not while hiking, but yeah, in that situation with a heart attack, of course, I always encourage everybody who does want to go out hiking, go out into the wilderness. It's always good to get some basic first aid, CPR training. That's something you can get nowadays online. You can get certified for your CPR and first aid online. There's also apps, first aid apps that you can get that don't require service, that you can bring up some of the information that they may have about heart attack or seizures or snake bite. In those situations, though, those would be an emergency situation. Of course, you definitely want to be prepared. Get your first aid and CPR training. Start your CPR if somebody does not have a heartbeat, and then of course send somebody for help. If you can't reach, if you don't have cell service where you are, which in a lot of these back countries, we don't always have cell service. So it's best to go get help, go send somebody to get help.
Right. And just, continue with CPR if they don't have a pulse or a heartbeat, and just keep going and have the group keep it going. Seizures or diabetic issues? Anybody have that? People
No.
out in terms of blood sugar, that kind of thing. Good to have something sugary with you. Like I always have those ginger candies, which are really kind of handy. Since we're probably not going to have juice with us, but something to give if someone's very low blood sugar. And snake bite. Have we ever experienced snake bite?
Nope.
No, but I mean, I knew somebody who got bit by a snake while hiking. And there is a, given how far you are away from emergency services, definitely can be a factor. They always talk about the golden hour when you get bit by a snake. And, if you can get that person to emergency care within an hour, that person will have a better chance of having a better recovery. They can get the anti-venom and stuff like that. So that's always something to think about when you are hiking out in snake country. And you talked about your exit strategies. If we were out hiking in this area, would we be able to get somebody out within an hour?
Yeah, and that would be either, rapidly getting help in there or carrying them out. And then the question is, and we've talked about this, if somebody could still walk, if they're ambulatory, is that going to be getting the circulation more than we want? I mean, that's always kind of a thought.
Yeah, it's best to, you want them to stay as calm as possible.
Yeah.
So, if you have to carry them out, if it's they got bit on the hand or something, they can immobilize the area and maybe walk slowly out. But always in a snake bite situation, once you get to an area where you can call for emergency services, you do it right away. Because they may want to get life flight or whatnot en route.
Right. Yeah. I had a story. It was in the Press Enterprise, our newspaper here. A couple of years ago, a UCR biologist was doing field work kind of behind where I live here in the Corona Hills, and walking through some high grass, and got bit by a red diamond snake, like the one that was on my potting bench. They're kind of native right here. And didn't rattle, had no idea. It just bit him. And he was really fortunate that he was right above Cahalco Road here, and a CHP officer was giving somebody a ticket, and he was able to kind of stagger down there and flag him down. And he said after about 10 minutes, he was starting to hallucinate. So I think you're really right about that golden hour, because fast moving venom. Anyway, stuff to think about. And behavioral challenges. Things to think about with our fellow hikers, and whether we're leading a hike or we're on a hike, or if it's a private hike, not a Sierra Club outing. What kind of discretion should we exercise at the beginning of a hike? If somebody is first of all, not really, almost like my friends with the yoga gear. But John, didn't you have a story about somebody that showed up in penny loafers? And
there was a hiker that showed up in penny loafers, no food, no water, no backpack. Other people pitched in and gave him some water, and it was a short hike, so I let him go on it. But I talked to him, and I think he must have been on the spectrum, because I told him, if you're going to go on hikes, you've got to bring water and wear shoes more appropriate. And he said, well, I signed up for a hike next week in Joshua Tree National Park. And I said, well, make sure you bring plenty of water. When you're going out in the desert, water is really important. And those shoes will not work in the sandy desert hikes in Joshua Tree. And then I warned the hiking leader of that hike. It wasn't my hike the next week. And he showed up at a carpooling place the same way. No water, inappropriate shoes, and the hiking leader did not allow him to go on the hike.
Right. Just so things to think about if you're the hiking leader, or if you're with a group of friends, or just a hiker in a Sierra Club group. People may need help, and people may need. There may be situations where someone shouldn't be on the hike if they're going to be put themselves in a situation where they could be in danger. You mentioned hikers on the spectrum. I think it's important for us to be open to everyone, neurological diversity, so people can enjoy the outdoors. Have we had experiences with people on the spectrum, and how can we help them, enjoy hiking and get time in nature.
Yeah, I agree with you. I want everyone to have the equal opportunity to experience nature. I think with individuals, you definitely have to spell out your expectations, and and remind them several times on the hike. My son, he's a runner. He will just get on the trail and he will take off. And so before we even go on the hike, we always outline the expectations that he needs to stay between two adults, and definitely outline your expectations, that you're not to run ahead of the first person. And we definitely want everyone to have an opportunity in nature. And I think there are definitely ways you can accommodate for everyone.
Yeah, I think that's really important. And, part of our mission, I think, is to get people out into the wilderness so they can enjoy it. Moving on to the next thing, hikers not abiding by rules. And I have a story about my spouse and I worked some years ago with a youth group in San Bernardino, and a lot of those kids, they had never, even though they're in San Bernardino, a lot of urban kids just don't get out hiking or camping. Their families just didn't do that. And so a lot of them were very new to it. And I remember one kid, we were up at Cougar Crest up in North Shore of Big Bear Lake. And he whips out his pack of cigarettes. He says, "I'm going to have a smoke." I said, "No, you're not. You're not smoking out here." But I mean, not abiding by rules or not understanding why we have these rules. And that was my kid smoking in the forest story. Any other stories about people just not abiding by rules or not understanding them?
Well, a lot has to do with communication again. If you're at the beginning of the hike, you communicate what the expectations are and the things you like to see on the hike that you expect the group to abide by.
Yeah.
Usually it's not a problem.
Yeah. Rare. I just remember there was such a diversity of experience among these kids. I mean, some of them were just dumbstruck, like with stars and how beautiful they were, and others just hadn't cooked, hadn't hiked, just really had a big learning curve, but they embraced it. Once you kind of, as Carl said, laid down expectations. Finally, encountering criminal behavior in the wilderness. I know many of us have seen things like graffiti, people graffitiing the wilderness. You guys want to elaborate on that? Maggie and I, my spouse and I, on a hike in the Grand Canyon, and there was the Grand Canyon, the national park, and somebody had a great big pen, and they were, oh my gosh, yeah, with our nieces, and they were graffitiing rocks by the trail, and I mean, we yelled at them. I mean, that was. We yelled at them and they stopped, but it was kind of astonishing. Any other experiences?
Yeah, I think in situations like that, you always err, of course, on the side of caution. If you're comfortable, like we had the same situation. We had some kids up in the forest behind our house graffitiing on an old water tank. We did approach them and let them know, hey, that's not cool. But if it is individuals that you may, or you're by yourself, or it's individuals that you don't feel comfortable around, of course, it's always best to just leave the situation and contact the appropriate authorities.
I've got another story kind of talking about being alone. One of our friends had been a volunteer in San Bernardino National Forest, and she was patrolling. This is some years ago. And there was a guy, and he looked a little odd. I mean, like behaviorally, and he This is like something out of a bad movie. The doll. You want to see my doll? And the hair on the back of her neck just stood up. And she says, "Oh, nice doll," and didn't check his pass and just kind of let him go. And the guy was acting very strange. And she never patrolled after that by herself again. So just know that there are behaviors that you may encounter out there that are really unexpected. I think Carl is right. Err on the side of caution. Listen to your intuition, because people do things that they ought not out there. And again, I just don't think it's a really good idea to hike by yourself. I really don't. Okay. Getting lost and finding lost people. So first of all, getting lost. Has anyone been lost?
Yes. Yes,
What did
both
you
to
do?
both. Yes, I have gotten lost and I have found lost people. So
Okay,
it's,
so getting lost. What did you do, Joe? How did you get
I
lost?
refer to my those little graphics right there, my compass, my map, got back on the trail and found the group.
Yeah, yeah.
Plus now you have a lot more resources like, the apps that are very good sometimes in finding you and getting you back on trail.
Yeah. I think a combination is a good thing. Although I think we always have to have map and compass. I think you have to have a paper map and a compass. I just don't think you can avoid that. You have, even though we're in this era of GPS and apps, I still don't have complete confidence in electronics out there. So finding lost people. Besides the really good idea of the storm whistle that John was describing, how have you, when you're in a group, how have you organized a group to find lost hikers? Carla, you had a story about that.
Yeah, we were on, there was a group of us on a hike down a City Creek to Strawberry Creek. It was it was a pretty long hike. And there were a couple sections of the trail where there was a Y in the trail where you could take a different trail. We had a situation where we had a group ahead, of just like 2 people ahead. And they weren't really paying attention. And on our way back, they took the wrong trail. Eventually, we did find them because we had a whistle. And so I blew my whistle. I instructed everybody to stay put. I knew the area very well. So I blew my whistle and I went ahead and went up that the other trail because we kind of dialed it down to that's probably where they went. Sure enough, they heard my whistle, they turned around, they started coming back. I met with them, and then we met up with the rest of the group. I don't recommend spreading your whole group out to look for somebody. Always keep the majority in one spot and have, 1 or 2 people who are most familiar with that area go look for the individual. This is where a whistle really comes in handy. And I recommend if you're hiking with kids, like I said, I have a runner, he will just take off. But we have taught him expectations on the trail. Should he lose, not be paying attention and take off and all of a sudden, whoa, mommy and the group are not there anymore. He has a whistle. And he's also been taught that should he get lost, he is to hug a tree and blow his whistle. So, whenever you're with children, it's always good to go over those expectations because it could happen. My son does get distracted and does not pay attention always.
Mm-hmm. Very practical solutions. And speaking of which, special considerations, kids and dogs. The dog is ours. I think the kids are Marianne Reese's family. But we had to put a picture of Mac, our dog, in the presentation. So I'm a big fan of hiking with dogs. Important to have water and we keep our dog on leash. I'm not a big fan of, our dog does not come when called. He's a terrier and he is just off and running. So we keep him on leash. And, take a lot of care in terms of ticks, paw issues. So we're pretty mindful when we hike with him. Any other pet issues that people have? Carla?
Yeah, I mean, I brought up the rattlesnake aversion training. Also, we take our dog out snowshoeing with us. When we do that, we don't go on very long snowshoes because we know that her paws may not be adapted to the snow very well. Of course, she is a mountain dog, so she goes out in the snow all the time. So she's probably a little more adapted than dogs coming up from down the hill. So just, keep an eye on him. If you see him limping, there's been a couple times where our dog's picked up a sticker, in the paw, and she'll be limping. We can help her get that out. Ticks, always do a tick check. There was a time I took her, of course, Strawberry Creek again, City Creek to Strawberry Creek, took her on a hike, peak tick season. And I was picking ticks off of her for weeks. So, definitely, take that in consideration. Sometimes it's not best to take dogs on hikes like that. And I've learned my lesson.
And what about kids? What about kids and hikes? John?
Yeah, I guess I can talk about that one too, because I've got a kid. With kids, of course, you always outline your expectations. And we talked about letting them know where they are, not to run ahead. If they do get lost, what do they do? Talked about teaching them what a bear, how to do a bear scare, stuff like that. Always talk to them about expectations. But for kids, nowadays our kids, they kind of have the attention span of a goldfish. I think a lot of that has to do with technology. So keeping kids engaged on the trail, I think, is also very important so that they have a good positive experience. And so we'll play games on the trail. We'll do a, follow the leader type game where each person will get an opportunity to be the leader. We'll do a game where we have to identify something with the next letter of the alphabet. So one person does A, the next person has to find something that starts with the letter B. So you try to keep them engaged as best you can. For teenagers and older kids, sometimes technology is a good way. You could get apps on your phone like plant ID apps, tree ID apps. You can get them to take pictures of different plants and trees and identify them. So you can definitely make it a learning experience as well.
I think those are great ideas. I mean, I remember growing up, my dad loved hiking and always made sure, even when we were very small, that we had age appropriate little day packs, 10 essentials, or little water bottles that were right sized for us as we grew, appropriate boots, even if they were hand-me-downs from friends, but appropriate, boots, real gear. And that way, it makes it fun, because I think if you go out there even as a kid and you don't have what you need, it makes it a lot less fun. And I saw, Joe, you had your dog with you right there.
Yes. And my dog hikes with me sometimes on dog-friendly trails.
Right. Yes. National forest trails, national parks are more of a problem. Anyway, I think that is kind of a nutshell of what we had thought were sort of the basics of troubleshooting. I just wanted to end with the Thoreau quote: "In wildness is the preservation of the world." Get out there, troubleshoot, and get out there. So thank you, panel, and thank you audience for listening. And I'll stop the screen share for now.
Yes, thank you, Julianne, for hosting.
Oh, you bet, of course.
And if you're interested, there's some good information in the chat. If you have your chat box open, the three little dots that are on the bottom side of the chat, if you click on those three little dots, the first option is save chat, and you can save that text that's in the chat. And Carla put in the 10 essentials, so that's a good thing. And I put in the link for the storm whistles. And Carla also put in the rattlesnake aversion training. So you can save all that stuff by clicking on those three little dots and then click on save chat.
Great. It's wonderful. Just wonderful. All right, everyone. Thank you. I'm just looking through all these good comments. Wow. And panelists, thank you so much for your wealth of information. Just a wealth of information. I really appreciate it. Does anyone else have any other questions in the chat or live? Because otherwise, I think it's time for us to call it a night.
I want to mention one other thing I forgot to mention at the beginning, and that is we are now having real live outings. So you can get out there and hike on a Sierra Club hike. So be sure to go to the San Gorgonio website and look at the outings there. There's lots of choices for you. And I'll put in a plug for my Peaks of the Cucamonga Wilderness patch program. You can earn a patch if you do the 7 Peaks of the Cucamonga Wilderness. And we got a number of outstanding hiking leaders leading hikes all over the place. So be sure to check it out. We're finally back on the trail.
Yes, which is a lovely thing. So good plug, John. Excellent plug. And everyone, keep hiking, and thanks for attending Trail Talk. And we will see you next month, third Wednesday of the month at 7 p.m. on Zoom. So thank you all, and